Hello, all you lovely people. It is Lane, and today is Today is Sunday. And what I'm going to be talking about today is basically just kind of like a 101 about non-binary trans people. And the reason that I wanted to make this video is because there is a huge trans community on YouTube, and I follow a lot of trans blogs and a lot of LGBT vlogs, and there's just a lot of misinformation being spread around, both by binary trans YouTubers and LGBT YouTubers and things like that, where people want to talk about trans people or they want to talk about non-binary people, but they don't know how to, so they wind up saying things that are not accurate or true. So, as a non-binary transgender YouTuber myself, I wanted to make a video just kind of clarifying some information about what non-binary trans people are. This isn't really like an introduction, so if you don't know what non-binary trans people are, maybe like type it into Google before you start watching my videos. Or just like visit lifeoutsidethebinary.com, which is the blog that I run that's in the description, that's very helpful for people who don't know what non-binary trans people are. A lot of people in the trans community, or I shouldn't say a lot of people, but a vocal minority within the trans community, think that non-binary people are not transgender. And to be honest, that pisses me off. It pisses me off when people say that. And I find that's more prevalent within the trans masculine community than like the trans feminine community or any other section of the trans community, because the trans masculine community has a lot of like true scum. And again, if you don't know what that word is, just like type it into Google and then come back to me. It's basically just people who think that they should be able to dictate what trans is or isn't, and they're like, you must meet 8 out of 10 medical transgender criteria in order to complete the trans test and receive your official transgender certification. And if you fail the trans test, then you are not trans, and you are doomed to the cisgender realm for the rest of eternity. Ha 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 ha. That's basically what true scum are. Yes, they are cis realm gatekeeper overlords who try to kick people out of the trans community. And basically, because I am a dysphoric, white, thin, usually masculine presenting, transitioning non-binary person, I have been included in the trans community where other non-binary people have been shoved out. And that pisses me off too. Basically, this is the trans umbrella. The trans umbrella encompasses every gender identity that does not align with the gender identity that one is assigned at birth. And under this trans umbrella is this non-binary umbrella. So you see there's like this umbrella, and then there's a little umbrella underneath the big umbrella. And so under the non-binary umbrella is every gender identity that is not exclusively male or female. Notice how this little non-binary umbrella fits very neatly under this larger trans umbrella. Yes, because the majority, not all, but the majority of non-binary people are transgender. Fancy that, given that they have a gender identity that is not the one they were assigned at birth, and that is the definition of transgender. Makes sense to me. Not that difficult of a concept to grasp. And some people are like, well, non-binary people are less likely to transition physically, and I'm really sexist, so I think that non-binary people aren't trans because they may not want to transition, even though tons of non-binary people transition. And the fact is that 20 to 30% of people currently accessing trans health services identify as non-binary. Yay! And tons of binary trans people who are active in the trans community are choose not to transition, or do not want to transition, or cannot transition. So the whole like not transitioning thing is not a non-binary exclusive thing. Yes, lots of non-binary people don't transition, but also lots of binary people don't transition. So saying that someone is not trans based on what they want to do or don't want to do or can or can't do with their body is really fucked up, and please don't do it. I will say that not all non-binary people identify as trans. There are a ton of different reasons why a non-binary person might not want to identify as trans. There are non-binary people who feel like they've been shoved out of the trans community, who don't want to identify as trans for that reason. There are non-binary people who have indigenous genders or like cultural genders to like different cultures that they're a part of, and they don't feel like their cultural identities are reflected in Western transgenderness, and that's totally valid too. So there's a bunch of different reasons why a non-binary person might not want to identify as trans, but to not go around saying that non-binary people aren't trans or that non-binary is a different thing from trans, because for the most part it's not. There are exceptions, valid exceptions, but for the most part, non-binary people are trans. Get it, live it, love it, move on. So, now that we have covered that, also a little bit of information about individual trans identities. I actually conducted a survey on this myself with like 800 participants or something like that. So I feel like I have a fairly accurate understanding of this, other than possibly having too small of a sample size, given that I only conducted this survey on Tumblr. So categories for non-binary identities. There are limitless non-binary identities. However, I found in my surveying that the most common non-binary identities fall into the following categories: agender or neutral. Any gender identities that involve a lack of gender, a neutral gender, things like that. So like the agender category is the first finger. And then there is fluid or mixed genders. So things like gender fluid, androgen, bigender, gender queer to some extent. Any gender that involves mixing up multiple different genders or being fluid between multiple different genders is like the second category. And then there is aliagender or maverick, or what some might call third gender, but third gender is like not a politically correct term and you shouldn't use it. It's basically genders that are like a stable identity, but they do not exist within the realm of masculinity and femininity. So the politically correct term for third gender is things like aliagender, which means like other gender, or maverick, which also kind of means like a solid gender identity that is outside of male and female. So that's like the third category. It's just like other genders. And then there is like demi-girl and demi-guy, which is like genders that are sort of more closely linked to a certain gender. Like someone's more close to being a girl, but they might be like partially agender or something like that. Or someone's like more close to being a guy, but they might be like partially androgynous or something else. And that doesn't depend on your assigned gender. Like you can be a demi-girl and be assigned male at birth. You can be a demi-girl and assigned female at birth. You can be a demi-guy and assigned female at birth. You can be a demi-guy and assigned male at birth. Like, your assigned sex does not play into, like, what this is. But those are the most common identities that I hear. A lot of people, like, when they're talking about examples of non-binary identities, they tend to throw in things that aren't really, like, common or worth mentioning. Like, they're like, oh, like, there's, like, agender and bigender and trigender, and it's like, trigender is an identity. I've never met anyone who identified as trigender, so if you're trying to, like, make a kind of inclusive, quick video in which you list a couple common identities, trigender might not be one of the ones that you want to include, given that people usually mention trigender, but they don't mention, like, neutral or androgen, when both neutral and androgen are far more common than trigender. So, now that I've covered that, moving on to pronoun preferences. I think there was a survey done that said, like, 3/4 of non-binary people are comfortable with the pronoun they, but what that means is not all non-binary people are comfortable with the pronoun they. And also, pronouns do not indicate what gender identity a person is. There are plenty of non-binary people who use he or she pronouns who are comfortable with that, whether it's the pronoun that's like opposite to the one they were assigned, or they just stuck with the pronoun that they were assigned. That doesn't mean anything about their gender. Like, I know people who are non-binary and they were assigned female at birth, but they don't care about pronouns. So they're like, I don't care about pronouns. I let people call me she because I don't care about pronouns, but I'm still non-binary. And that's legit. And I also know people who are like assigned female at birth, and they're like, I use he pronouns because it's something that I'm more comfortable with, but I don't identify as male, I just identify as non-binary. He is just the pronoun that I prefer. And that's totally legit too. Everyone has preferences. And it's never safe to assume that because someone uses certain pronouns that they are a certain gender, or because they are a certain gender that they will use certain pronouns. Everyone has preferences, and you kind of have to know or ask. Don't assume. Non-binary is not like a thing. And I feel like the problem with when people address it when they're either binary cisgender or binary transgender is that they try to place it within the dichotomy of male and female. So it's like, here's male, here's female, and here's non-binary, which is the third gender. Again, which is a very politically incorrect word that shouldn't be used. But that's how people think about it. They try to be like, there's male, there's female, and then there's non-binary, which is the other thing. And it's like, non-binary is such a wide scope of experiences. Literally all it means is not binary. It doesn't mean anything else. Like, there's no similarity of experiences for non-binary people. Like, there's no, like, consensus of preferences or identities or anything like that. All that non-binary means is you are defined by not being either male or female. There is so much possibility in there, and people really just need to not make generalizations or assumptions or try to group non-binary people together to be some sort of like cohesive third option, because that's not how it works. That's not how non-binary gender works. That's not how gender works in general. Gender is very nebulous and fluid and spectrumy and complicated. Gender is complicated, and I think that's kind of the point that I want to leave on, is that gender is very, very complicated. So, I will sign off, and I will see you next time, and I hope this video was somehow cohesive or made sense or was helpful to anyone in any way.